Is white, male, Christian, and heterosexual the Mercedes-Benz in our society? Is Latin American, immigrant, LGBTQ, female, are we the clunkers in our society?
What if everything you thought you knew about this world and its people wasn't true? I don't believe a label can show the world our shared humanity, our goals, our hope for a world where finally everyone belongs.
So welcome to a special edition of Liberate Your Authentic Self. This is the Time to Rise, Ask the Author series. And joining me today is Elaine Mendoza.
We are not a label. So next time somebody tells you, this is America, we speak English here, I don't want you to react out of anger, because anger doesn't get us anywhere. So next time somebody uses a label against you, remind them that we are all human beings, and hashtag all humans belong. Thank you. What does it feel like when you grow up with 4 labels that are perceived as having less value? You realize that 1, you can let your anger consume you or control you. Or 2, you can learn to bring more light and love and inclusion and diversity to this world. But to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice, for all who are born in the United States, because everyone else has no worth. What a tough lesson I've spent my whole life trying to learn. I'm a citizen of nowhere on planet Earth, and I realize I'm just a criminal of birth.
I believe if we all do the work to remove the labels that attach themselves to us, or the labels that we over-identify with, we will be free to finally create the life that we desire, and ultimately, the world we all deserve to live in.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here tonight, and I promised myself that I was going to tell you some stories tonight that I've never told anyone. So I invite you into my living room so we can have a little chat what it was like to grow up with 4 labels that are controversial in our society. Now, I wanted to start by saying that you are already free. You are already free. And I can almost sense some of you in your living room saying, how am I free? I have to work 8 hours a day. I have kids. I have bills to pay. I wanted to talk about freedom, not from a material perspective, because I think society, the media, the world in general tells us, if you only make more money, then you can have the freedom that you want. I'm not talking about that kind of freedom. I'm talking about the freedom from the labels that we were born with and the ones we acquired along the way. So you could say I'm talking about freedom from a spiritual perspective, not from the material world and our responsibilities. So I wanted to make that clear. I wanted to start my presentation with something that we can all relate to. And I started thinking, what is an image I can show you that will explain the moment we were born? Because when we were born, we were under divine laws. We were not yet under human laws. So I chose this picture because I was a preemie. I was born 2 months early. So I was actually in an incubator, pretty much like this one. When we are under divine laws, everything applies equally to all of us. We are all equal. Each one of us watching this tonight, you were at the hospital at some point. You had no idea what your nationality was. You had no idea that you were a race. You don't even know if you're a boy or a girl. You don't even know your name. But it is at this point in our life story that we go from having divine laws and we go into human laws, because it's in this moment in time when we suddenly have a nationality, an implied race, or religion that we inherit from our families, and we did not have a choice in the matter. It was at this point in time that I didn't know that this moment would affect me for the rest of my life. Now, for those of you who saw my TED Talk, you will realize that I was born in Venezuela. And when I was born in Venezuela, I was eventually taken to the United States when I was 6 years old for the first time. I want to ask you guys tonight, when you tell your story, when you tell other people, who am I? You probably do a combination of I am American, I have a family, I have a partner, I'm bisexual, I'm pansexual, demisexual. There's a lot of labels nowadays. But I assure you that you probably use a label to describe who you are. And I don't know what happened to nationality there, but that just happened today. So I want you to take a minute and write down, how would you describe yourself? How do you describe yourself to other people? Okay? And I want you to do this exercise for yourself. Now, 7 years ago, some people thought that I had lost my mind because I accomplished this American dream. I had a really nice apartment in Annapolis, Maryland. If you're familiar with Annapolis, you know how beautiful it is. All I would have to do is open my window and I had the Chesapeake Bay. It was the dream. I had accomplished it. I had on paper, it's important for me to say on paper, a 6-figure income job. So I had financial security, a nice apartment, even a purse collection that I was somehow very proud of. But for some reason, I looked at myself and I looked at everything in my apartment, and I had this moment where I thought, I am not any of this. I work 6 days a week. I'm on call 24 hours a day to keep all of this, but I'm not any of this. And it was then that I decided I have to change my life. This is not the life I want to have until retirement, just so I can travel 20 and 30 years later. So tonight I created this workshop, which is truly an extension of my TED Talk, which is called The Power of Labels to Change Your Story. Because I had a personal mission 7 years ago to find out what just happened. What happened in my life? Now, for those of you that don't know, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I trained to be a Broadway style performer. And for those of you that don't know what that is like, it is years of work. I actually had an acting teacher that said it takes more money and effort to train a Broadway style performer than it does to train a doctor. Because you can go to medical school for 8-10 years, but when you are training to be a performer on stage, the work starts when you're very young. So as a teenager, I took numerous voice lessons. I took tap lessons, I took acting lessons, and eventually one of my dreams came true. I was accepted into one of the most prestigious musical theater schools in New York City. And for me, that was, I was living the dream. What I didn't realize, though, is that this moment in time would affect that dream. Divine laws told me I was deserving and worthy. Human laws told me differently. If you have not seen the TED Talk, you will know that after graduating from school in New York City, I did everything right. I was never illegal. My parents did everything according to the law. We followed every rule. And I was rejected. I was initially rejected. They said, we have reviewed your case and we have determined that you have insufficient reasons to remain in the United States. And that was perhaps one of the most shocking, life-changing moments of my life. And that was the day that my career did not even get started. Going through that experience, I realized how one label affected my life, the label of immigrant. Imagine when you have 4 labels that the world somehow finds so offensive. So immigrant, Latina, woman, and I am also a part of the LGBTQ community. And when people ask me which letter, I just say all of them, because I actually don't believe in labels, and I believe that love has no sexuality. So I wanted to go one by one, all the labels that I started to detach from. All these years of travel, I started observing other countries, other cultures. And yes, I found differences between us, but the differences were actually really superficial. For example, we have different languages, we have different foods, different religions and customs. But I remember sitting at a cafe and I was looking at the commuters and I was writing on my laptop and I realized, oh my gosh, we do the same exact things. We are more alike than we actually are different. But labels create this illusion that we are somehow different. It's important for me to say that labels by themselves are not the problem. I'm a writer. I use labels all of the time because it serves a purpose. You can describe a person, place, or thing by using a label. You can say the handsome Italian man. You can say the beautiful red chair. The labels by themselves or the adjectives are not the problem. The problem comes in when we start to use labels to separate people into 2 groups. The first group is worthy and deserving. The other group is less valuable. So what happens when somebody says, I am more important than you because I was born here? What happens is you can turn on the news tonight and you will realize the result of believing in these labels. So now that you've written, hopefully in front of you, how you describe yourself to other people, I'm going to take a trip back in time. And this trip is going to teach us the very, very basics of Humanity 101 that I believe we have forgotten all over the world. As I say here, this is a Humanity 101 to rediscover the truth of who we are outside of these labels. Because before labels created division between us and within us, we were already free. It's important for me to go back to this picture. Now, this baby somehow knew that he was safe. He or she was safe and worthy of everything that life had for him. He knew that he was taken care of. All he had to do was cry and he would get food. He would get his diaper changed. He trusted the universe to take care of him. But somehow along the way, we started to create human laws. And human laws, the main difference is that they don't apply equally to everyone. And my life story is a perfect example of that. Now, when I did my TED Talk, this is a story that many of you may find interesting. I was so sick in this picture. I had a fever. I had bronchitis because the universe has a sense of humor. That's exactly what happened to me days before the TED Talk, bronchitis. If you don't know what that is, it means you have an uncontrolling cough that you just have to get through it. And I think what happened to me that night was I was telling a story I was most afraid to tell. Now, I had been rejected 7 or 8 times for a TED Talk because I was being fearful of my own story. I finally spoke to a speaker coach who told me, Elaine, the story you must tell is the one you're most afraid of telling. So I got on stage in Florida right before election year, and I said, I am an immigrant, I am Latina, I am queer, and it was one of the scariest moments of my life. It was important for me to have this moment because not only was it an election year and I was in Florida, but I wanted to say, you know what? You may not agree with me, but hashtag all humans belong. And I started spreading the all humans belong movement. Now, for those of you who wish to do a TED Talk, realize the best advice I can give you is tell the story you're most afraid of telling. What if I told you that the main thing I have learned after visiting more than 40 countries, I don't count because I don't do it. I don't visit countries like trophies. I just go wherever I feel like going. But I discovered that the labels that I was given at birth and the ones I acquired along the way had nothing to do with who I really was. And most importantly, they have nothing to do with who you are. So tonight, I want us to detach from these labels one by one. You don't have to travel the world and give up everything to figure this out because I'm going to teach this to you in this next 45 minutes. So nationality. Let's start with that one. Now, nationality wasn't even a concept until realistically around 1920. It's important to say that I did extensive research when I wrote my book, Humanized. I didn't just want to say, hey, this happened to me and this is my opinion. I wanted to put facts, I wanted to put history behind each one of these labels. After I wrote the book, I sent it to a behavioral scientist, Dr. Lisa Penny, and I said, look, I want a scientific approval that what I have written is actually truth and that it's actually going to help a lot of people, not just people with my labels, but that can help everyone in some way. So I discovered that nationality was not really a concept until 1920. That was when the blue passport was created. Why was that passport created? Well, we had a pandemic about 100 years ago. And this pandemic, people were confused when it comes to the number of people that were sick and not sick. So the government said, we need to have a passport. We need to be able to count people. The original idea of having a passport was to have a head count of everyone. So we were using the label of nationality just to describe where everyone was born. Eventually, as we know, nationality spread like wildfire all over the world. And now nationality took away our freedom of movement. It's the reason we have different passports. It's the reason we have 30 days in some countries and 90 days in other countries. We lost the freedom of movement that all of our ancestors once had. So nationality is a pretty new concept. You and I accept it because we're the first generation that we don't know better. We were born within the last 100 years. So to us, that has become normal. Let's move on to sexuality. Now, when it comes to sexuality, I have gone through a lot of different life experiences. So on one end, you have homosexuals. On the other end, you have heterosexual. And if you see the space between my hands, there's a big elephant in the room. There's a big gray area that nobody talks about. And I started to talk about sexuality because I grew up in a Catholic household. And some of you will find this shocking, but I realized as I got older that there are 3 other gay people in my immediate family. And I realized, wait a minute, the labels of sexuality affected me because it automatically changed my story. As soon as I told somebody that I was bisexual or pansexual or demisexual, whatever label you want to give me, I'm okay with it. I realized that it created a story of who they thought I was. And most importantly, a story doesn't have to be based on truth for people to believe it. So you can imagine growing up as a non-heterosexual girl in a Catholic household. I then started to realize that labels don't just divide us from each other, they cause division and chaos within ourselves. Because I realized that the label of religion and my sexuality somehow was like oil and water. It just didn't quite mix. So I won't have time to speak about every single label tonight, but I will speak about the 4 main ones that I have. So to prove how ridiculous the illusion of nationality and sexuality and all of these labels are, this is a picture of my family by love, not blood. And every single person in this picture was born in the same exact city that I was born in Venezuela. Not only that, some of us were born in the same exact hospital that actually belonged to one of my uncles. And we were laughing this day. I said, who would have thought that between us, now I'm American because I am a US citizen nowadays, some of them are Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, and we were all born in the same hospital. I'm not making this up. The label of nationality is a complete illusion, and we have bought into it. And I assure you that the people in Paris, they may speak a different language, but they're exactly like you and me. Everyone is just trying to have a peaceful life. Everyone just wants to not be judged, and everyone just wants to have equal opportunities. So there you go. I just proved that the illusion of nationality is nothing but an illusion. It's not the ultimate truth, and it's not who you are. All right, now this picture tells 1,000 stories. If you recognize the person on the left, that is Boy George. And the person on the right is me with a very cheeky smile because I was so excited to meet him. Now there's a story behind this picture. There's 2 stories, 2 very big stories. Now the first one is that I wanted to figure out what freedom was from a spiritual perspective, not from a material perspective. So I actually lived in a temple in the outskirts of London, and I lived as a monk because I wanted to study with Krishna monks specifically this year. And this happened over the spring this year. After I studied with the Krishna monks, I was accepted to do Vipassana. For those of you who do not know what Vipassana is, it is basically 100 hours of meditation in 10 days. So I was able to spend time with Buddhist monks because I don't follow one organized religion. For me, it's exciting to figure out the common ground in all of our spiritual belief systems. Anyway, I'm there for 3 months and the schedule was brutal, but I also found out that Boy George had been at the same temple that I was in years, decades before. Now, Boy George, he says that the Krishna monks helped him overcome his addiction problems in the 80s. But we also know that Boy George is also very gay. So this is where the problems come in and labels start to overlap. So Boy George was so grateful to the Krishna monks that he said, I want to be initiated. I want to be a Krishna. And of course they said, well, if you want to be a Krishna, you would have to marry a woman. And I don't know what Boy George said, but he's a Buddhist nowadays. So that's all I'm going to say. What I found interesting about this experience, and I started thinking very carefully, is why is it that Boy George is welcomed at the temple? And he sang for us. He did a private concert for us, and it was fantastic. And he came there for free to help them raise money for the temple. And I thought to myself, why is it okay for him to do that? But if he wanted to get married or initiated, he's not allowed to do so just because of his sexuality. And that did not sit well with me. And I remember walking around the temple that day and thinking, something is not okay here. Something is not okay. So I went back to the spiritual teachings of what I was learning at the temple. And I realized that the first day of class, one of the first things that the Krishna monks taught me was, you know what, Elaine? You are not your body. You are not this. Your spirit is in your body, and you're using your body right now pretty much the way you would use a coat during the winter. You need it right now, but after this life is over, you're going to remove the coat and you're going to receive another coat. I remember mentioning to one of the gals at the temple that I was having issues with my own sexuality and the teachings of the monks in this organized dogma, because the problem isn't spirituality. The problem is when spirituality becomes a religion and then we have to follow all of these dogmas. One of the gals told me, Elaine, what is your anxiety? You look anxious today. And I said, well, I just don't understand why Boy George is able to raise money for the temple, but if he was to get married here, he can't. That's not okay with me. To make a very long story short, my comments reached the temple president. And then we had a private meeting, and I thought, oh my God, who said something? So here we are sitting on the floor, and the temple president became quickly one of my most favorite people. I just felt a connection to her. I thought she was amazing. And she's very open to listen to the new generation of Krishna devotees. And at this point, I'm questioning, do I even want to be a part of this? We sat there and she said that homosexuals cannot marry in a Krishna temple. And she said, why should they marry here? I remember counting to 10 and saying, Elaine, stay calm, just stay very calm. And I said, with all due respect, on the very first day of class, one of the things you taught me was that we are not our bodies, that we are souls. So why does it matter what two souls get married? Why does it matter what two souls love each other? It seems to me that you're discriminating me for the body that I'm in. And you guys believe in reincarnation. So I don't understand, because the teaching says one thing and reality says another. It was one of the most meaningful moments of this past year, because I feel that at least I planted a seed of tolerance in the Krishna community. I don't consider myself a Krishna, but I did enjoy their book. I enjoyed the Bhagavad Gita, and I took what was good from this experience. The other thing I wanted to talk about, that there's a reason why the lady in the middle is taken out of the picture. I don't want to get sued, first of all. But it was brought to my attention a week after this picture was taken, literally a week, that she had reported me because she was very uncomfortable with my sexuality. So I want you to realize that when you have labels that are different than the norm, that you don't have to look for trouble. It looks for you. I didn't have to do anything but just be who I was. So I was questioned by their department that was dealing with the complaint. And I said to them, I don't understand this situation, because 1 week ago, she was my friend and we went to the Boy George concert. And I tell this story now that Boy George saved the day, because I was able to prove with this picture that I was innocent and that this young lady was having some issues of her own that had nothing to do with me. And I wanted to share that story because when you are different, when you're not heterosexual, you have to deal with this sort of prejudice all the time. It's like I'm not allowed to have female friends because if I'm a little bit too friendly, am I being friendly? Am I being inappropriate? So we have to live with this state of anxiety all of the time because we never know who's going to report us for what. And that was a very recent experience that I had, and one of my most painful experiences because I thought this person was my friend. So I wanted to share an example of how two labels can cause division, not just between us, but within us. The labels of sexuality and religion are something we really need to work on. Whew, this picture. One of the labels that I like to discuss is that we are also not our body. And this is in a lot of spiritual circles as well. Now, this picture I took in May when I went home to see my mother. And my mother is in the very last stage of dementia, Alzheimer's. And it was in this moment that I realized it's true what they tell me. It's true what they tell me. We are not our body. Now, my mother can no longer speak. My mother can no longer walk, but she holds my hand so tightly, as strong as she always has, as if she was healthy. And it's in that moment that I realized, oh my God, we are not our bodies. There is an energy in this body that is my mom with this illness. And that's when I realized that we're not only not our bodies, but we're also not the illnesses that we are diagnosed with. It was a very important moment for me because I realized that love never dies. Couldn't help but get emotional. That is my mother. So anyway, going back to some of the labels that I talk about in the book Humanized, and all the labels I started to detach from during my 7+ years of travel, I realized this business of relationship status. And I thought it was so important to talk about that because when you're a man over 40 and single, you're a stud. When you're a woman over 40 and single, what happened? There's a stigma around it. A lot of people don't know that when you are single and don't have kids, that it affects you not just your own self-esteem, because society tells you you must get married by 30, but there are actually 1,000 tax laws, over 1,000 tax laws that actually protect married people. This means that if you're single without children, that you're going to pay more for everything. And when I say everything, from your car, mortgage, interest rates, your mortgage, you're automatically at a higher tax bracket. So the discrimination for people who are single goes from not just society thinking that there's something wrong with you, but also affects you financially. So that's one of the labels I talk about, because every time I speak to one of my students that are 25 years old or older, they start to feel bad about themselves. They attach this label as if it determines their self-worth, as if it determines their value. And it has nothing to do with who you are at the end of the day. The next label I like to discuss in my book is the label of family. Family. Now, in Latino culture, we think that family is the best. We have to do everything according to what our family tells us, not just in Latino culture, but in a lot of different cultures. Your family name can dictate what you study in college. Your family name can dictate who you're allowed to marry. And when you come from a healthy family and it's supportive and loving, then of course, by all means, be proud of your family name. The problem comes when your family is not healthy. Maybe you come from trauma, maybe you come from abuse, and that is a part of my personal life story. So it's important to detach from the label of family so you can discover who you are outside of the family circle. And it took me some time to realize, you know what? I am not my family. I am not the result of all of these experiences. I have a story. We all have a story. We all have negative things that happen to us. But at the end of the day, we're also not our family, and we're also not our story. The story is a part of us, and it's important that we face it. It's important that we heal any past trauma. But at the end of the day, we have to look at our story as if we're reading it. And the moment we detach from what happened is the moment we can start to heal and grow from all of these experiences. I also talk about jobs. Now, in the Western world, I have seen this massive difference between the Western world and other parts of the world, because no one has ever asked me outside of the United States, what do you do? It's almost like they don't really care what I do for a living, because they've learned to separate what you do with who you are. Of course, in the United States, which is where I grew up, we're very attached to our job titles. We're very attached to what we accomplish in life, what we achieve. Don't be mad at me, but that's actually not who you are either. That's not who you are either. And I use examples in my book that, let's be honest here, we don't remember Jesus for being a carpenter. We remember him for who he actually was as a person. And that goes for any religion that you're a part of, is that it's not important what you do for a living. You are reminded by your essence, by your energy, and all the goodness that you left behind in this world. Now, after this picture, how did I start to detach? How did I slowly start to detach from the tragedy of my story, from the anger that I felt inside of me for not being able to pursue my dreams as a Broadway performer? I visited every country that my ancestors were from, and it led me to Canary Islands. I found my oldest ancestor left Canary Islands in 1725, eventually made it to Venezuela, and I was shocked to find out that this is my oldest ancestor. I was shocked because it's the equivalent of finding out that I'm related to Thomas Jefferson or something like that. That's when I realized that I wasn't one story. I wasn't this sad immigrant story and I had my dreams taken away from me. I was bigger than that. My ancestors were at the top of the totem pole. They were conquistadores. They went from Spain to Venezuela and they conquered, and they did all of the terrible things that colonizers did. It was important for me to find out this story because I always saw myself as being this very small story. I grew up in the United States, I'm Latina, I was believing what society told me I was. When I looked into my ancestors and I realized I was so much more, something clicked for me. I'm like, wait a minute. We are not one story. We are many stories in one. Now, my ancestors, unfortunately, they did a lot of terrible things, but at the end of the day, I am the person I am today. I'm the result of all of this history. We all have ancestors, and if we dare to look far enough, we will realize that we are a lot bigger than we think we are. So I wanted to share something with you guys today, and I wrote this in Canary Islands. I was so overwhelmed with my experience there and finding out who my ancestors were, and the fact that he helped write the Declaration of Independence of Venezuela from Spain. I'm like, wow, I'm related to this person. I just remember thinking that it was time to let go. It was time to let go of all the tragedy, of all the labels, of all the stories that people told about me. And it was time for me to tell the world, you know what? I am not the enemy. I know you think I'm the enemy, but I am not the enemy. I never was, and I never will be. So I wanted to debut tonight my poem called My Body Tells a Story. And I wrote this shortly after realizing who my ancestors were. I'm going to share it for the first time tonight with you. My body tells a story. When I get up in the morning and brush my curls, it tells me a story of my Black ancestors that blended with the Spanish conquistadores. The white and the black blend to form these curls. When I enter the shower to soap my skin, I notice the hairless legs and arms that tell me a story of the indigenous tribes of South America that at one point mixed in with the colonizers. My olive tone is a reminder of the Spanish and Portuguese that once crossed oceans to meet with the Caribs. I am not a race, but the summation of all races. I am South American, Latina, Hispanic, or Latinx. Whatever label the world gives me will never be enough because my body tells many stories. I am the colonizer that killed the natives and exploited the Black slaves. I am the Black slave that was taken to foreign lands without my consent. I am the indigenous tribe that was murdered for wealth and power. I am both the bully and the victimized. I am both royal and peasant. To discriminate anyone would be to deny a part of me. To tell just one story would be to deny all other parts of my existence. When I dance to salsa or merengue, I'm returning to that place where all of our stories combined to create our distinct sounds and beats. I'm remembering that I'm not one identity. I am many identities in one. When I see my thighs and my buttocks, I see my ancestors' DNA manifested into this new form, tone, height, and size. When I dance to Venezuela's tambores, I call my ancestors back into my body and I let them remind me of where I came from. When I sing, the sounds that come out of my body are many stories. I am old school bolero. I am part Latin lover and part American musical. I am not just Venezuelan or American, and a hyphen cannot fully express the complex genetics that runs through my veins. You are a part of me, and I am a part of you. To deny this would be to deny my ancestors, their stories, their sacrifices, and their heartache. I can't hate you or discriminate you without first hating a part of me. We are not a race, we are an ethnicity. Even then, we aren't one label. Together, we have been woven into this term people are calling Latinx because we are many existences in one. When I see my face and eyes, I remember that it's possible I have Asian as a distant cousin or perhaps even blood from places unknown. You think I may be Middle Eastern, and I can't tell you with certainty that I'm not. When you discriminate me or hate me, you're also denying a part of your story. You're also denying a part of your truth. Whether you identify as a colonizer, empathizer, or anything in between, there is only one thought that rings the sounds of truth, and that is that you are me, and I am you. So I wanted to conclude this presentation tonight with something that I learned at the temple. And it is, I need the PowerPoint. I can't see it. There we go. This is what the Krishna monks taught me about freedom. What is freedom from a spiritual perspective? And it is in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the oldest and most popular spiritual books in the world. It is much better to live your own destiny imperfectly than to live an imitation of somebody else's life with perfection. So I dare you guys tonight to tell your story for the first time ever without the labels you have attached your self-worth to, and realize that we're all just equal and deserving human beings. Thank you.